Brandon Chen stood frozen in the private dining room of Philadelphia's most exclusive restaurant, his hand still raised from the dismissive gesture he'd just made toward the elderly woman in the doorway. But now he wasn't seeing the restaurant anymore. He was seeing something impossible, a figure made of light standing between him and his mother, and the look in those ancient, knowing eyes made Brandon's blood run cold, because he understood, with absolute certainty, that he was about to experience every moment of pain he'd inflicted on the woman who gave him life.
If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, pause this video. I'm putting resources in the description that could save a life.
You're probably wondering how a 32-year-old investment banker with a 7-figure salary ended up face-to-face with Jesus Christ in a restaurant, about to relive every cruel moment he'd inflicted on his mother from her perspective. Let me take you back to where it started. Back to when Brandon Chen was a poor kid in South Philadelphia, with a mother who worked 3 jobs to give him everything, and how he repaid her by pretending she didn't exist. There's a particular cruelty in being ashamed of the people who love us most, a special kind of betrayal in rejecting those who sacrificed everything for our success. And when that shame turns into public humiliation, when we actively hurt those who raised us to preserve our image, we commit a sin that cuts deeper than any physical wound. This is the story of Brandon Chen, a first-generation Chinese American who climbed from poverty to prosperity in 1 generation, who went from a cramped apartment in South Philly to a penthouse in Rittenhouse Square, who transformed himself from the son of an immigrant seamstress into a successful investment banker worth $3 million by age 32. But success came with a price Brandon was willing to pay: the complete erasure of his mother from his public life. Mei Chen had worked herself nearly to death to give her son every opportunity. She'd sewn garments in sweatshops for $12 an hour. She'd cleaned office buildings at night. She'd taken in laundry and ironing, all so Brandon could attend private school, go to college, have the chances she never had. And Brandon had succeeded, spectacularly. But somewhere along the way, he decided that his mother, with her broken English, her humble clothes, her calloused hands, was an embarrassment, a liability to the image he was building. So he cut her out, lied about her, and on the occasions when she appeared uninvited in his new world, he humiliated her publicly to maintain his facade. For 5 years, Brandon inflicted countless wounds on his mother's heart, small cruelties that accumulated into massive betrayal, public rejections that devastated the woman who'd given him everything. But Mei Chen never stopped loving her son, never stopped praying for him. And on the night Brandon committed his worst act of humiliation, deliberately embarrassing his mother in front of his colleagues and wealthy fiancée, Jesus Christ appeared and did something that would break Brandon completely. He made him experience every moment of pain from his mother's perspective. This is a story about the sin of shame, about how we wound the people who love us to protect ourselves, about a mother's unshakable love and a son's devastating transformation, about how Jesus sometimes saves us by destroying the false self we've built and forcing us to face who we've become. The Capitol Grill in Center City, Philadelphia, was the kind of restaurant where entrees cost $80 and the wine list started at $200 per bottle. Brandon Chen sat at a large table in a private dining room with 7 colleagues from his investment firm and his fiancée, Victoria Preston. Victoria came from old money. Her family had been wealthy for generations. She was beautiful, polished, educated at Wellesley, and exactly the kind of woman Brandon needed on his arm to complete his transformation from poor immigrant son to successful American elite. Tonight was important. Brandon's managing partner, Richard Caldwell, was at the table, along with 3 senior vice presidents. This dinner was supposedly a celebration of Brandon's recent success. He'd just closed a deal that brought the firm $15 million in fees, earning himself a substantial bonus. But Brandon knew the real purpose. Richard was evaluating whether Brandon had the right qualities for partnership, and those qualities weren't just about financial performance. They were about image, connections, social graces. Whether Brandon fit into the world of old money and privilege that the firm served. Brandon had spent 5 years carefully constructing his image. He'd erased his South Philadelphia accent. He'd learned which wines to order and how to discuss them. He wore custom suits that cost $4,000 each. He'd joined the right clubs, developed the right tastes, cultivated the right persona, and he'd systematically removed any evidence of his humble origins from his public life. "Brandon," Victoria said, touching his arm gently. "You seem distracted. Everything all right?" "Perfect," Brandon said, smiling at his fiancée. She had no idea his mother was a seamstress who'd emigrated from China with nothing. Brandon had told Victoria his mother had died when he was young, that he'd been raised by a wealthy uncle. It was easier than explaining the truth. Richard Caldwell raised his wine glass. A toast to Brandon, youngest VP in the firm's history, and on track for partnership. "You've come a long way, my boy." Everyone raised their glasses. Brandon smiled, accepting the praise. He had come a long way from a cramped apartment where he'd shared a bedroom with his mother, where they'd eaten rice and vegetables for every meal because meat was too expensive, where his mother had sewn late into the night while Brandon studied. But that world didn't exist anymore. Brandon had killed it, buried it, created a new history where he'd always been destined for success, where poverty had never touched him. The appetizers arrived: oysters, caviar, foie gras, $2,000 worth of food for 8 people. Brandon didn't even notice the cost anymore. This was his life now. That's when the hostess appeared in the doorway of the private dining room, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Chen? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman at the front who says she's your mother. She doesn't have a reservation, but she's asking to see you." "Should I?" Brandon's blood ran cold. His mother. Here. Now. He saw Richard Caldwell's eyebrows raise slightly. Saw Victoria's confused expression. She thought his mother was dead. Saw the other partners exchanging glances. 5 years of carefully constructed lies were about to collapse, unless Brandon acted immediately. "There must be some mistake," Brandon said smoothly, his voice betraying nothing. "My mother passed away years ago. This woman is confused." "She seems quite certain, sir," the hostess said. "She's showing me a photo of you as a child. She's very insistent. Please have security. Escort her out," Brandon said firmly, his tone cold. "I don't know who she is, but she's clearly unstable, probably looking for money. These scammers target successful people." The hostess looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Of course, sir. I apologize for the disruption." Victoria touched Brandon's hand. "How awful. Do you want me to?" "It's fine," Brandon said. "Just some mentally ill woman. Happens occasionally." But inside, Brandon was panicking. His mother was here, in this restaurant, about to expose everything. He stood abruptly. "Excuse me for just a moment. I'll handle this personally." "Good man," Richard said approvingly. "Can't let these people disrupt business." Brandon walked quickly out of the private dining room, through the main restaurant, toward the entrance. And there she was. Mei Chen stood in the lobby, small and elderly at 68, wearing her best clothes, which were still obviously cheap and worn. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun. Her face, weathered from decades of hard work, was lined with worry. She held a small gift bag in her trembling hands. When she saw Brandon, her face lit up with joy and relief. "Brandon, my son, I know you are busy, but today is your birthday, and I made you. What are you doing here?" Brandon hissed in Mandarin, keeping his voice low and his face turned away from the main dining room where other patrons might see. "I bring you birthday cake," Mei said in heavily accented English, switching languages and holding up the gift bag. "I bake your favorite. I call your office, but they say you are at dinner, so I come to give you." "You can't be here," Brandon said sharply. "I told you never to come to my workplace or to any restaurant where I'm meeting clients." "But Brandon, today is your birthday. You are 32 years old. I want to see you, give you." "I don't want your cake," Brandon said, his voice hard and cold. "And I'm not your son. Not here. Not in this world. Do you understand? You're embarrassing me." May's face crumpled, hurt flashing across her features, but she steadied herself. "Brandon, why you say this? I am your mother. I raise you. I give you everything." "You gave me nothing," Brandon lied, the cruelty in his voice surprising even himself. "I made myself. I earned everything I have. You were just an obstacle I had to overcome." The words hit Mei like physical blows. She took a step back, the gift bag falling from her hands. "Brandon," her voice was barely a whisper. Brandon saw Victoria approaching from behind, coming to check on him. He needed to end this now, decisively, in a way that would leave no doubt. "Listen to me carefully," Brandon said in English, loud enough for others to hear, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't know who you think you are, but you need to leave immediately. My mother died years ago. You're just some crazy woman trying to scam me. Security." 2 security guards appeared. "Please escort this woman out," Brandon said. "She's harassing me. If she comes back, call the police." "Brandon, please," Mei begged, now crying. "Why you do this? Why you hurt me like this? I am your mother. I love you. Remove her," Brandon ordered the guards. The guards took Mei gently by the arms. She didn't resist. She was too shocked, too heartbroken. But as they led her away, she looked back at her son with such profound sadness, such devastating betrayal, that for just a moment, Brandon felt something crack inside him. Then he pushed the feeling down, turned away, returned to his persona. Victoria was standing there, watching. "Brandon, are you okay?" That was intense. "I'm fine," Brandon said. "Just a mentally ill woman. I feel sorry for her. But we can't encourage that behavior." "You handled it well," Victoria said, taking his arm. "Very firm but compassionate. That's the kind of strength I love about you." They walked back to the private dining room. Brandon's hands were shaking slightly, but he clenched them into fists until they steadied. When they entered, Richard Caldwell looked up. "Everything sorted?" "Yes, sir," Brandon said smoothly. "Just a confused woman. Security's handling it." "Good. Can't let these people think they can disrupt your life. Now, where were we?" The dinner continued. Brandon laughed at jokes, discussed the stock market, performed his role perfectly. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he'd been ignoring for 5 years, a voice whispered, "You just destroyed your mother in public. You called her a crazy scammer. You had her physically removed by security. What have you become?" Brandon silenced the voice with more wine, with more performance, with more distance from the truth. Outside, Mei Chen sat on a bench 3 blocks from the restaurant, crying silently, the birthday cake she'd baked for her son still in the gift bag beside her. She'd used the last of her grocery money to buy the ingredients. She'd spent all afternoon making it, remembering how much Brandon had loved this cake when he was a boy. And he'd called her a crazy scammer, had her removed by security, denied she was his mother. Mei pulled out her phone, an old flip phone, nothing like the expensive smartphone Brandon carried and considered calling him. But what would she say? He'd made his position clear. He didn't want her in his life. She was an embarrassment to him. She thought about the years she'd worked, the sacrifices she'd made, how she'd sewn until her fingers bled to pay for Brandon's private school, how she'd cleaned office buildings at 3 in the morning so she could work during the day in the sweatshop, how she'd eaten rice alone so Brandon could have protein with his meals, how she'd worn the same 3 outfits for 10 years so Brandon could have new clothes for school. And this was how he repaid her, with shame, with denial, with public humiliation. But even through her tears, even through her broken heart, Mei Chen did what she'd done every day for 32 years. She prayed for her son. "Jesus," she whispered in Mandarin, sitting on that cold bench. "I know my son is lost. He is ashamed of me. He hurt me tonight in a terrible way. But he is still my son. And I ask you, please, please, save him. Show him what he has become. Bring him back to truth. I forgive him for what he did tonight. But Lord, don't let him continue living in these lies. Save my Brandon, please." Mei's prayer rose to heaven like incense, and in the throne room of God, Jesus Christ heard it. He'd been watching Brandon for 5 years, watching the transformation from humble, grateful son to arrogant, ashamed adult, watching the accumulation of cruelty, waiting for the right moment to intervene. That moment had come, because at 10:47 p.m. that night, as Brandon sat in his penthouse apartment congratulating himself on how well he'd handled the situation, Jesus Christ was preparing to appear. And he was bringing with him something that would destroy Brandon's false identity completely. The ability to experience every moment of pain he'd inflicted on his mother from her perspective. To understand the depth of Brandon's betrayal, you need to understand Mei Chen's story. Mei was born in 1956 rural Guangdong province, China, during one of the darkest periods of Chinese history. She grew up during the Cultural Revolution, experienced the famine of the Great Leap Forward, lived through chaos and scarcity that Americans can barely imagine. Her father was a farmer. Her mother sewed clothes by hand. They were desperately poor, even by the standards of rural China. Mei had 3 siblings. Often, there wasn't enough food for everyone. Mei, as the eldest daughter, frequently went without, so her younger brothers could eat. She learned to sew from her mother. By age 10, she could make a shirt by hand in 2 hours. By age 12, she was helping her mother take in sewing work to earn extra money. By age 14, she was supporting her family through her sewing skills. Mei never attended high school. Her family couldn't afford it. She worked instead. Sewing, always sewing. Her fingers calloused, her eyes strained, but she kept working. At 23, Mei married Chen Wei, a factory worker. They had 1 son in 1992, Brandon Chen. Mei had hoped for a better life for her child, but China was still poor. Opportunities were limited. When Brandon was 4 years old, Chen Wei was killed in a factory accident. Mei became a widow with a young son and no safety net. She made a decision that would change both their lives. She would emigrate to America. It took her 4 years to save enough money, to get the necessary papers, to arrange everything. During those 4 years, Mei worked 16 hours a day. She left Brandon with her mother while she worked in factories, earning just enough to save a few dollars each month. Finally, in 2000, when Brandon was 8 years old, Mei and her son arrived in America with $800, 2 suitcases, and tremendous hope. The reality of America was harsh. Mei spoke almost no English. She had no college degree, no professional skills, no connections. She found work in a garment factory in South Philadelphia's Chinatown, working in conditions that would shock most Americans. 12-hour days, 6 days a week, paid in cash, $12 an hour. She and Brandon lived in a tiny apartment, a single room with a bathroom down the hall, shared with 3 other families. But it was theirs. And more importantly, Brandon could go to school, American school, free school, the opportunity Mei had never had. Mei was determined that her son would have a different life. She enrolled Brandon in the best public school she could find. She helped him with homework even though she couldn't read English. She saved every extra dollar for his future. When Brandon was 12, Mei learned about a private school called Philadelphia Academy, a prestigious institution where wealthy families sent their children. She learned that sometimes they offered scholarships to exceptional students. Brandon was exceptional. Even in a language he'd only been learning for 4 years, he excelled academically. He was smart, driven, hungry for success. Mei encouraged him to apply to Philadelphia Academy. "You can be anything in America," she told him in Mandarin. "You can be doctor, lawyer, businessman, not like me. I have no education. But you can have everything." Brandon was accepted to Philadelphia Academy with a 50% scholarship. That still left $9,000 per year in tuition. On Mei's salary of $12 an hour, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, she earned approximately $37,000 per year before taxes. A rational person would say it was impossible. $9,000 was more than a quarter of Mei's income. But Mei wasn't rational about her son's future. She was determined, so she took on more work. She found a night job cleaning office buildings, another 20 hours per week at $10 an hour. She took in laundry and sewing from neighbors. She worked 7 days a week, sometimes 20 hours a day. On a good year, after paying rent and the absolute minimum for food and utilities, Mei could save $10,000. Just barely enough for Brandon's tuition. For 6 years, from age 12 to 18, Brandon attended Philadelphia Academy, while his mother worked herself nearly to death to pay for it. Did Brandon appreciate this? At first, yes. When he was 12 and 13, he understood his mother's sacrifice. He saw her exhaustion. He felt guilty that she worked so hard for him. But as he got older, as he spent more time in the world of wealthy classmates, something shifted. Brandon began to see his mother not as a hero making incredible sacrifices, but as an embarrassment. The other students at Philadelphia Academy had parents who were doctors, lawyers, business executives. They had parents who attended school functions in expensive clothes, who spoke perfect English, who understood the culture. Brandon's mother wore cheap clothes and spoke broken English. She worked in a sweatshop and smelled like fabric and industrial chemicals. She didn't understand American customs or social norms. At first, Brandon just didn't invite her to school events. He made excuses. "You're too tired, Mom. You should rest." He attended parent-teacher conferences alone, claiming his mother was sick, but then it escalated. Brandon began actively hiding his mother's existence from his classmates. When friends asked what his parents did, he said his father had died in a car accident. True, and his mother worked in textile importing, a lie that made her sound like a business owner rather than a factory worker. When a classmate once saw Mei picking Brandon up from school, Brandon introduced her as their housekeeper, who was giving him a ride. Mei didn't speak enough English to understand what he'd said, but she knew from Brandon's tone and the dismissive way he treated her in front of his friend that something had changed. That night, Mei cried quietly while Brandon studied in the other room, but she didn't confront him. She told herself it was just a phase. He was a teenager, navigating a difficult world. He'd come back to honoring her eventually. She was wrong. Brandon graduated from Philadelphia Academy as valedictorian. He was accepted to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania with a full scholarship. Mei cried tears of joy when the acceptance letter arrived. All her sacrifices had been worth it. Her son would have the education she'd never had, the opportunities she'd dreamed of for him. At Wharton, Brandon's transformation accelerated. He was surrounded by the children of America's elite, students whose families owned companies, who summered in the Hamptons, who wore clothes that cost more than Mei earned in a month. Brandon wanted to be one of them, not the poor kid on scholarship, not the Chinese immigrant son, but truly one of them. So he began creating a new identity. He told people his mother had died of cancer, a lie that gave him sympathy and explained her absence. He said he'd been raised by a wealthy uncle who had business interests in China, completely fabricated. He learned to talk like them, dress like them, think like them. Meanwhile, Mei continued working. She was proud her son was at a good university, but she barely saw him. Brandon rarely came home. He said he was busy with studies and internships. When he did visit, he was distant, uncomfortable. After graduation, Brandon got a job at a prestigious investment firm. He was one of the few minorities hired that year, part of the firm's diversity push. But Brandon worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove he belonged there on merit, not just as a diversity hire. Within 3 years, he'd been promoted to associate. Within 5 years, vice president. By age 30, Brandon was earning $400,000 per year, more money than his mother had earned in her entire life. But the more successful Brandon became, the more he distanced himself from his mother. He moved to a luxury apartment in Rittenhouse Square and didn't tell Mei the address. He changed his phone number and gave her his office line instead, which his assistant usually screened. He visited his mother perhaps 3 times a year, always brief visits, always uncomfortable. And he never, ever invited her into his new world. Mei still worked at the garment factory. Even though Brandon was now wealthy, even though he could easily support her, he didn't offer. And Mei was too proud or too heartbroken to ask. She lived in the same tiny apartment in South Philadelphia. She wore the same worn clothes. She worked the same exhausting hours. And she prayed every single day for her son to remember where he came from, to honor his mother, to stop being ashamed of the woman who'd given him everything. But Brandon's shame only deepened when he got engaged to Victoria Preston, a woman. From old Philadelphia money, he told her his mother had died years ago. It was easier than explaining the truth, easier than risking Victoria meeting Mei and seeing where Brandon really came from. And so 5 years passed with Brandon systematically erasing his mother from his life. Rare visits became no visits. Phone calls became texts, became nothing. Brandon sent Mei money, occasionally $1,000 here or there, like charity rather than filial responsibility, and told himself he was being generous. He had no idea how each casual cruelty, each rejection, each denial of her existence was slowly breaking his mother's heart. But Jesus knew. Jesus had been watching. And on the night Brandon humiliated his mother at the restaurant, having her physically removed by security, denying she was his mother in front of his wealthy colleagues, that was the night Jesus decided enough was enough, because Mei's prayers had finally tipped the scales. her faithful intercession, her refusal to stop loving her son despite his cruelty, her willingness to forgive him even as he hurt her. It had built a bridge between heaven and Brandon's penthouse, and Jesus was about to cross that bridge.
Before we continue, if you believe in second chances and the power of faith, type restore in the comments right now. Let your voice be the spark of hope for a family in need. Show the world your faith in action.
Brandon Chen sat on the leather couch in his penthouse apartment at 10:45 p.m., sipping expensive scotch and feeling pleased with himself. The dinner had gone well. Richard Caldwell had pulled him aside afterward and mentioned that the partnership discussion would be happening soon. Victoria had told him how proud she was of how he'd handled that situation with the mentally ill woman. His colleagues had complimented his composure. Brandon had successfully protected his image. The uncomfortable truth of his origins remained buried. Everything was fine, except it wasn't. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the expensive scotch and self-congratulation, Brandon felt something gnawing at him, a discomfort he couldn't quite name. The look on his mother's face as security escorted her out, the way her voice had broken when she'd said, "I am your mother, I love you." But Brandon pushed the feeling down. He'd been pushing feelings down for 5 years. He was good at it. He checked his phone. Victoria had texted, "Can't wait for the wedding next month. You're going to make the perfect husband. Love you, future Mr. Preston Chen." They'd decided on a hyphenated last name. Preston Chen sounded distinguished. Old money meeting new money. It was perfect for their image. Brandon smiled and was about to text back when the temperature in the apartment suddenly dropped. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had opened a door to a freezer. Brandon's breath became visible in the air. What the? Brandon stood up, looking toward the thermostat. Had something broken? The heat was supposed to be set to 72 degrees. That's when he felt it. The presence. Someone was in the apartment with him. Brandon spun around, his heart rate spiking, reaching instinctively for his phone to call security. But he froze when he saw what was in his living room. The corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows was glowing, not like a lamp, like the air itself was becoming light. Golden, warm light that grew steadily brighter, more intense, more impossible. "This is a dream," Brandon said aloud, his voice shaking. "I'm drunk. I'm hallucinating." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. This was more real than anything he'd ever experienced. The light took form. A figure emerged, a man dressed in simple white robes that seemed woven from the light itself. His face was neither old nor young, neither distinctly Asian nor Western, nor any single ethnicity, but his eyes ancient, infinite, holding depths of knowledge and compassion and authority that made Brandon's successful persona feel like a paper mask. Brandon knew immediately who this was. There was no question, no doubt. "Jesus," he whispered. "Yes, Brandon," the figure said, and his voice filled the entire penthouse, despite being spoken softly. "I am Jesus Christ, the one your mother prays to every night, the one she's been begging to save you before you destroy your soul completely." Brandon's legs felt weak. He backed up until he hit the wall, unable to process what he was seeing. "This isn't real," he said again, but with no conviction. "This is the most real thing you've ever experienced," Jesus said. "Everything else in this apartment, the expensive furniture, the luxury finishes, the carefully constructed image you've built, that's the fantasy. Tonight, you face reality." He took a step toward Brandon, and Brandon felt like he couldn't breathe. "You humiliated your mother tonight," Jesus said, and though his voice wasn't loud, it carried a weight that pressed against Brandon's chest. "You called her a crazy scammer. You had security remove her from the restaurant. You denied she was your mother in front of the people whose approval you crave more than you love the woman who gave you life." I had to," Brandon stammered. "If they knew the truth about where I came from, if they knew the truth." "What?" Jesus interrupted. "You'd lose their approval, their respect, your image would be tarnished, and you value that more than your mother's dignity?" Brandon couldn't answer, because the answer was yes, and admitting that was too devastating. "Brandon Chen," Jesus said, his eyes boring into Brandon's with intensity that made Brandon want to disappear. "I'm going to show you something tonight. I'm going to let you experience what your mother has experienced for the last 5 years. Every moment of shame, every moment of rejection, every moment of heartbreak. You're going to feel exactly what she felt, and then you're going to choose whether to continue this path or to become the man you were meant to be. Please, Brandon whispered. I don't want to see anything. I'll do better. I'll call her tomorrow. I'll apologize. Tomorrow, you'd rationalize it away, Jesus said. Tomorrow you'd convince yourself it wasn't that bad, that you were just protecting your career, that your mother understands. But tonight you have no escape from truth. Jesus extended his hand and touched Brandon's forehead. The penthouse disappeared. Brandon found himself standing in his mother's tiny apartment in South Philadelphia, but he wasn't in his own body. He was experiencing everything from his mother's perspective, her thoughts, her feelings, her physical sensations. He felt the ache of her 68-year-old body, the arthritis in her hands, the constant fatigue from decades of overwork, the pain in her knees from standing at sewing machines for 50 years. But worse than the physical pain was the emotional weight. Brandon could feel his mother's love for him, a love so profound, so unconditional, so all-encompassing that it was almost overwhelming. She thought about him constantly, prayed for him daily, worried about his soul, his happiness, his future. And layered over that love was a grief so deep it was like a physical wound. The grief of being rejected by the person she loved most in the world. The grief of watching her son grow, ashamed of her. The grief of being treated as if she didn't exist. The vision shifted to a specific memory 3 years ago. Brandon watched himself, from his mother's perspective, visit the apartment. Mei had cooked all afternoon, preparing all of Brandon's favorite dishes from his childhood. She'd used money she could barely afford on ingredients. When Brandon arrived, he stayed for exactly 20 minutes. He ate almost nothing, claiming he'd already eaten. He checked his phone constantly. He made excuses about having to leave for a work meeting. Through his mother's eyes, Brandon saw himself as he truly looked. Cold, distant, uncomfortable, counting the minutes until he could escape, and he felt his mother's heart break. She'd spent all day cooking out of love, and her son couldn't even pretend to care for an hour. The memory shifted. Another visit. Brandon's birthday 2 years ago. Mei had made him a traditional Chinese birthday meal, noodles for long life. Symbolic dishes for prosperity and happiness. She'd bought him a gift, a jade pendant that had cost her a week's salary. Brandon had accepted the gift with barely concealed disdain. Mom, I don't wear jewelry like this. This is not really my style. Through his mother's perspective, Brandon felt the stab of that rejection. She'd saved for weeks to buy something meaningful, and he dismissed it as if it were garbage. The vision shifted faster now, showing moment after moment of casual cruelty. Brandon telling his mother not to call him at work because it was unprofessional. Brandon claiming to be too busy to visit on Chinese New Year, the most important family holiday. Brandon speaking to his mother in English instead of Mandarin when they were in public, knowing she could barely understand, deliberately excluding her. Brandon introducing his mother to a colleague as the woman who does alterations on my suits, rather than as his mother. Each memory was a knife wound, and Brandon felt every single cut from his mother's perspective. But the worst memory was tonight, the restaurant. Brandon experienced it from his mother's viewpoint. He felt her excitement at seeing her son, her joy at bringing him a birthday cake she'd made with love, her hope that maybe this time he'd be happy to see her, and then the crushing devastation when Brandon denied knowing her, when he called her a crazy scammer, when he had security physically remove her from the building. Through his mother's eyes, Brandon watched himself look at her with contempt, heard himself lie to Victoria, claiming his mother was dead, saw the satisfied expression on his face as security led Mei away, and Brandon felt what his mother felt, a pain so profound it was almost unbearable. Not physical pain, spiritual pain. The pain of being rejected by the child you'd sacrificed everything for. The pain of being denied, humiliated, treated as if you were less than human. The pain of watching your son choose his image over your dignity. Through his mother's heart, Brandon felt the question that tormented her constantly. What did I do wrong? Why does my son hate me? Did I fail him somehow? And the devastating answer she told herself. He is ashamed of me because I am poor, because I am uneducated, because I speak broken English, because I am not good enough for his new world. Stop, Brandon begged. back in his own consciousness but still experiencing his mother's pain. Please stop. I understand. I get it. I hurt her. Please don't make me feel any more. But Jesus' voice was firm. You need to feel all of it, because you've been inflicting this pain for 5 years while feeling nothing. Tonight, you feel everything. The scene shifted violently. Now Brandon was experiencing memories he'd been deliberately forgetting. His mother's sacrifices. He felt his mother's exhaustion working 20-hour days to pay for his private school. Felt her physical pain sewing until her fingers bled. Felt her going to bed hungry so he could have enough to eat. He experienced a memory from when he was 14. His mother had saved for months to buy Brandon a new winter coat. The other boys at Philadelphia Academy wore expensive North Face jackets, and Brandon had complained that his coat was embarrassing. Mei had spent $350 on a coat for Brandon. Through her perspective, Brandon felt the calculation. That's almost a full week's wages. That's groceries for a month. That's next month's electricity bill. But my son needs to fit in. He needs not to be ashamed. She'd bought the coat and told Brandon it was on sale. In reality, she ate rice alone for a month and wore her old coat with a broken 9-zipper to pay for it. Brandon remembered receiving that coat. He'd barely thanked her, had complained that it wasn't the exact style he wanted, had said, "This is fine, I guess." Experiencing his mother's feelings in that moment, her hope that he'd be happy, her crushing disappointment at his ingratitude, but her immediate self-blame. Maybe I bought the wrong style. Maybe I should have asked him first. Maybe I'm not good at these things. It destroyed Brandon. Memory after memory flooded him. His mother working an overnight shift so she could attend his high school graduation in the morning, then falling asleep during the ceremony because she was so exhausted. Brandon had been angry she'd fallen asleep, embarrassed in front of his classmates. He'd never considered that she'd worked all night so she could be there at all. His mother missing work and losing wages to bring him care packages during his first semester at Wharton because she'd heard he was stressed. Brandon had been annoyed by the visit, told her she didn't need to check up on him. He'd never realized those care packages represented days of work she'd sacrificed to show him love. His mother learning to use email, which was incredibly difficult for her, just so she could stay in touch with him when he stopped answering her calls. Brandon had responded to her carefully written emails with one-word replies, busy, or fine, or just K. Each memory was another weight crushing Brandon's heart. Because from his mother's perspective, her entire life had been oriented around one thing, giving her son a better life than she'd had. Every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of pain, it was all for him, and he'd repaid her with shame, with rejection, with deliberate, calculated cruelty. The visions shifted one final time. Now Brandon was seeing potential futures, what would happen if he continued on his current path. He saw himself marry Victoria in a lavish wedding, saw his mother watching from across the street, uninvited, too heartbroken to approach, but unable to stay away from her son's wedding, saw himself deliberately not looking in her direction, pretending he didn't see her. He saw himself make partner at the firm, achieving the success he'd craved. Saw his mother dying alone in her apartment 3 years later, her heart giving out from grief and exhaustion. Saw the landlord finding her body 2 days after she'd died because no one had checked on her. He saw himself receive the phone call. Saw himself feel mild sadness but mostly relief. No more awkward reminders of his past. No more risk of his origins being exposed. Saw himself attend the funeral with Victoria, playing the role of grieving son while feeling nothing. And then he saw beyond death. He saw himself decades later, an old man, successful by every worldly measure, standing before the throne of God for judgment. And he heard the words, "When did you see me hungry and not feed me, thirsty and not give me drink, a stranger and not welcome me?" Future Brandon protested, "Lord, when did I see you in need and not help?" And the answer came, "What you did not do for your mother who loved you sacrificially, who gave you everything, who prayed for you constantly, you did not do for me. She was my daughter. Hurting her was hurting me." Brandon watched his future self realize too late that all his worldly success meant nothing, that he'd traded his soul for approval from people who didn't really matter, that the one person whose love was unconditional had been the person he'd rejected. And he saw where that path led: eternal separation from God, eternal regret, eternal consciousness of the mother he'd destroyed while pursuing empty success. The vision ended abruptly. Brandon was back in his penthouse, on the floor, Jesus standing over him. Brandon was sobbing uncontrollably, his entire body shaking. "I destroyed her," Brandon gasped. "Oh God, I destroyed my own mother. What have I done? What have I become?" Jesus knelt beside him. "You've become exactly what the world teaches men to become, successful but soulless, wealthy but worthless in the ways that matter. You've gained the world and lost yourself in the process. How do I fix this?" Brandon wept. "How do I possibly make this right?" "By choosing humility over image," Jesus said. "By choosing your mother over your reputation. By becoming the son she raised you to be instead of the man you've made yourself into." "They'll know I lied," Brandon said, fear creeping into his voice. "Victoria will leave me. The firm will question my integrity. I'll lose everything I've built." "You'll lose everything that doesn't matter," Jesus corrected. "And you'll gain the only thing that does, your soul, your relationship with your mother, your integrity, your humanity." He placed both hands on Brandon's shoulders. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to call Victoria and tell her the truth that your mother is alive, that you've been lying, that you need to make this right. Then you're going to call your managing partner and tell him the same thing. Then you're going to go to your mother's apartment, fall on your knees, and beg her forgiveness." "And if they reject me?" Brandon asked. "If I lose my job, my fiancé, my reputation, then you lose things that were built on lies," Jesus said, "and you get the chance to build a life on truth. Brandon, your mother is 68 years old. She doesn't have unlimited time left. You're running out of chances to honor her, running out of moments to love her. This is your last opportunity to choose rightly." "I will," Brandon said, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll lose everything if I have to. Just please help me fix what I've broken." Jesus smiled, a smile of such compassion and approval that it warmed the frozen places in Brandon's heart. "Then you are saved, Brandon Chen. In this moment, you choose truth over lies, honor over image, love over success, and that choice will cost you everything you falsely valued, but it will give you back your soul." He began to fade, his form dissolving into light. "Remember this night," Jesus said as he disappeared. "Remember what you felt experiencing your mother's pain, and let that memory keep you humble, keep you grateful, keep you devoted to the woman who gave you everything." And then he was gone, leaving Brandon alone on the floor of his penthouse, but not the same Brandon who'd celebrated humiliating his mother just hours earlier. That Brandon was dead. This Brandon broken, ashamed, but finally awake was new.
If this moment is touching your heart, share your story or a prayer request in the comments below. Someone watching may need the encouragement only you can give. Tag a friend who could use this message of hope today.
Brandon didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he experienced his mother's pain again, felt her grief, her love, her heartbreak from the inside. At 6 a.m., he sat on his couch and made the hardest phone call of his life. "Victoria, I need to talk to you. Can you come over?" Victoria arrived at 7 a.m., concerned. "Brandon, what's wrong? You sounded strange on the phone." Brandon looked at his fiancée, beautiful, sophisticated, from a world he desperately wanted to join, and he told her the truth. "Victoria, my mother isn't dead. She's alive. She lives in South Philadelphia. She works in a garment factory. And the woman I had removed from the restaurant last night was her." Victoria stared at him, confusion and shock crossing her face. "What? Brandon, I don't understand. You said your mother died when you were young." "I lied," Brandon said simply. "I've been lying for 5 years because I was ashamed of where I came from, ashamed of my mother, because she's poor and speaks broken English and doesn't fit into the world I wanted to be part of." "You lied to me for our entire relationship?" Victoria's voice was rising. "You let me believe your mother was dead? You made me feel sympathy for you based on a lie?" "Yes," Brandon admitted, "and I'm so sorry. It was unforgivably cruel to you and to my mother. I don't have a good excuse. I was ashamed, and I let that shame turn me into a liar." Victoria stood up, pacing. "I need to understand this. Your mother, the woman you had security remove last night, she's really your mother?" "Yes." And she came to bring me birthday cake she'd baked with money she could barely afford because she loves me. And I humiliated her publicly because I was more concerned about preserving my image than honoring the woman who sacrificed everything for me. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Brandon could see her processing, see the layers of their relationship being re-evaluated in light of this revelation. "Who are you?" Victoria finally asked. "I thought I knew you. But if you could lie about something this fundamental for years, I don't know you at all." "You don't," Brandon agreed. "You know the persona I created, the person I pretended to be. But that person was a lie. The real me is the son of an immigrant seamstress who worked herself to exhaustion so I could have opportunities she never had. And I repaid her by pretending she didn't exist." Victoria looked at him with an expression Brandon couldn't quite read. Disappointment, anger, confusion, maybe pity. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. This is a lot. You lied to me, Brandon, about something huge. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. I don't know if I can marry someone capable of this kind of deception." "I understand," Brandon said, "and I don't blame you. I wouldn't trust me either." Victoria walked to the door, then paused. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell the phrase, truth," Brandon said, "to everyone. My firm, my friends, everyone who believed the lies I told. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of my mother's love." Victoria nodded slowly and left without another word. Brandon watched her go and knew he'd probably lost her. The wedding would be cancelled. The life he'd planned with her was over. And surprisingly, he felt relief more than grief. Next, Brandon called Richard Caldwell, his managing partner. It was 8 a.m. early, but Richard was always at his desk by 7:30. "Brandon, what can I do for you?" "Richard, I need to come in and talk to you about something. Something serious. Can it wait until the partners' meeting this afternoon? We were planning to discuss your promotion." "It can't wait," Brandon interrupted. "And it's about my promotion. I need to tell you something that might change your decision." An hour later, Brandon sat in Richard's office and confessed everything. The lies about his mother, the deception about his background, the truth about where he came from. Richard listened with an increasingly stern expression. "Brandon, I'm disappointed. Not about your background. Where you come from doesn't matter to this firm. We care about merit and character. But lying, creating a false identity, that raises serious questions about your integrity." "I know," Brandon said, "and I'm not making excuses. I was wrong. I let shame and ambition corrupt me, and I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences you decide are appropriate." Richard was silent for a long time. "The partnership vote is next week. I'll need to inform the other partners about this situation. I can't promise what they'll decide. Your performance has been exemplary, but character matters in a firm like ours. And dishonesty, even about personal matters, reflects on your character." "I understand," Brandon said. "Why are you telling me this now?" Richard asked. "You could have kept the deception going. Why choose this moment to confess?" Brandon thought about how to answer. "How do you explain a supernatural encounter to a Wall Street executive? Because I realized I was destroying my soul to build a career," Brandon said simply. "And my soul matters more." Richard studied him for a long moment. "That's surprisingly mature. Most people your age would make the opposite choice." "I've been making the opposite choice for 5 years, Brandon said. "It nearly destroyed the person I love most. I can't keep doing it." After leaving Richard's office, Brandon went back to his penthouse and changed clothes. He took off his expensive suit and put on jeans and a sweater. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. For 5 years, he'd been wearing a costume. Today, for the first time, he was just going to be himself. At 2 p.m., Brandon stood outside his mother's apartment building in South Philadelphia. His heart pounded. His hands shook. This was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, knocked on the door of apartment 3C. His mother answered. When she saw Brandon, her expression cycled through shock, hope, and fear. "Brandon, what you do here?" "Mom," Brandon said, his voice breaking immediately. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." Mei stepped aside, and Brandon entered the tiny apartment. He looked around, really looked for the first time in years. The worn furniture, the small kitchen, the photos of him on every wall, the evidence of a life lived humbly but with love. "Mom, I need to say something," Brandon began. Then his carefully planned speech dissolved, and he fell to his knees in front of his mother. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did last night, for what I've done for 5 years, for denying you, humiliating you, treating you like you don't exist." Mei stood frozen, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You gave me everything," Brandon continued, sobbing now. "You worked yourself, nearly to death, so I could have opportunities. You sacrificed every comfort so I could go to private school. You went hungry so I could eat. You wore the same clothes for years so I could dress nicely. And I repaid you by being ashamed of you, by pretending you were dead, by treating you with cruelty." "Brandon," Mei tried to speak. "No, please let me finish," Brandon said. "Last night, after the restaurant, Jesus Christ appeared to me." Mei's eyes widened. "He showed me what I've done to you. He made me experience every moment of pain from your perspective. And Mom," Brandon's voice broke completely, "I felt your love for me, so unconditional, so sacrificial. And I felt how much I've hurt you, every rejection, every lie, every moment of shame. I felt it all." "Jesus appeared to you," Mei whispered in Chinese. "Yes, because you've been praying for me. Your prayers saved me, Mom, saved me from destroying my soul completely." Brandon looked up at his mother through his tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. What I've done is unforgivable, but I'm begging you anyway, please forgive me. Please give me a chance to be the son you raised me to be instead of the person I became." Mei Chen stood looking at her son, the child she'd carried, the boy she'd raised, the young man she'd sacrificed everything for, and the adult who'd broken her heart repeatedly. And she did what mothers do. She loved. Mei knelt down beside Brandon on the floor and pulled him into her arms. Both of them cried years of pain, years of separation, years of wounds being acknowledged and grieved. "I forgive you," Mei whispered in Chinese. "Of course I forgive you. You are my son. I will always forgive you." They held each other and wept. And in that tiny apartment in South Philadelphia, something broke and something healed simultaneously. After a long time, they sat together on Mei's worn couch. Brandon took his mother's work-roughened hands in his. "Mom, I need to tell you what I'm going to do. First, I told Victoria the truth. She might leave me. I don't know yet, but I couldn't keep lying to her." Mei nodded. "Second, I told my boss the truth. I might lose my job. I'll definitely lose the promotion I was going to get, but I had to be honest." "You do right thing," Mei said. "Third, I'm going to tell everyone the truth. No more lies. No more hiding you. I'm going to be proud of you, Mom. Proud to be your son. Proud of where I come from." Mei's eyes filled with tears again, but happy tears this time. "And fourth," Brandon continued, "I'm going to take care of you, the way I should have been doing for years. You're not working at that factory anymore. I don't care if you protest. You've worked enough for one lifetime. I'm going to support you. And I want you to live with me, if you're willing. I want to spend time with you. I want to learn to be your son again." "Brandon, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Brandon said firmly. "Not because I owe you, though I do. Not out of guilt, though I feel plenty of that. But because I love you, Mom, and I've been too proud and too ashamed to show it. But I love you. And I want to honor you the way you deserve." Mei cupped Brandon's face in her hands. "I pray for this day, every day for 5 years. I pray Jesus save you, bring you back to me. And he does. He answers my prayer." "Your prayers saved my life," Brandon said. "Jesus told me that. He said you built a bridge between heaven and me with your intercession, and he crossed that bridge to save me." They sat together for hours, talking, crying, beginning the long process of rebuilding what Brandon had destroyed. And for the first time in 5 years, Brandon felt peace, real peace. Not the false confidence of a persona, but the deep peace of living in truth. The consequences of Brandon's honesty were swift and severe. Victoria called the next day. The wedding was off. She couldn't marry someone who'd lied to her so fundamentally. She wished him well but needed to move on. Brandon accepted her decision with grace, understanding he'd destroyed her trust. The firm's partnership committee met 3 days later. They decided Brandon would not be made partner. His performance was exemplary, but his dishonesty about his background raised questions about his character. However, they didn't fire him. His confession and willingness to accept consequences demonstrated some integrity. He would remain as vice president, but with a note in his file about the deception. Brandon accepted this decision too. He'd known it might cost him the promotion, but keeping his job at all felt like a grace he didn't deserve. The social consequences were perhaps most painful. Brandon's colleagues at the firm looked at him differently, some with judgment, some with confusion, some with a new respect for his honesty. But the easy camaraderie was gone. He'd been exposed as someone who'd fabricated his identity. Friends from his Wharton days drifted away when they learned the truth. The carefully constructed social network Brandon had built on lies fell apart. Within a month, Brandon had lost his fiancée, his partnership track, and most of his social circle. But he'd gained something far more valuable: his mother. Mei moved into Brandon's penthouse apartment. He'd been worried she'd feel uncomfortable in such an expensive place, but Mei adapted with grace. She didn't care about the luxury, she cared about being near her son. For the first time in 5 years, they had dinner together every night. They spoke in Mandarin. They watched Chinese television shows. Brandon learned to cook traditional dishes from his mother. He also learned her story in detail, things he'd never taken time to ask before. He learned about her childhood in China, the hardships she'd endured, the courage it took to emigrate. He learned about his father, whom he barely remembered. He learned about the sacrifices she'd made that he'd never known about. And Brandon began the long process of making restitution. He couldn't give back time. He couldn't undo the hurt, but he could show honor going forward. Brandon insisted Mei retire from the garment factory. He set up a bank account for her with enough money to live comfortably. He took her to doctor's appointments she'd been neglecting because she couldn't afford co-pays. He bought her new clothes, not expensive designer brands, but quality, comfortable clothes that suited her. More importantly, he spent time with her, real time, not obligatory visits but genuine relationship. On weekends, they'd visit the Philadelphia Museum of Art or walk through Chinatown together. Brandon would introduce his mother to colleagues or acquaintances they met, saying with pride, "This is my mother, Mei Chen. She emigrated from China and worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities. Everything I've achieved is because of her." The first few times he did this, Mei cried. She'd waited 5 years to hear her son claim her publicly. Brandon also began attending a Chinese church with his mother. At first, he felt out of place. He'd spent years trying to distance himself from Chinese culture and identity. But slowly, he reconnected with his heritage and found community. One Sunday, the pastor asked Brandon to share his testimony. Brandon agreed. Standing before a congregation of mostly Chinese immigrants, Brandon told his story. He held nothing back: the shame, the lies, the cruelty to his mother, the night Jesus appeared, the visions that broke him. "I thought success meant erasing where I came from," Brandon said in Mandarin. "I thought I had to deny my mother to be accepted by the wealthy American world. But Jesus showed me that I was destroying my soul to build an image, that honoring my mother was more important than impressing people who didn't really know me." He looked at Mei, sitting in the front row. "My mother prayed for me every day for 5 years. While I was rejecting her, denying her, hurting her, she was praying for my salvation, and Jesus heard her prayers. He came to save me because she never stopped believing I could be saved." Many people in the congregation cried, because many of them had similar stories. Children who'd become successful and grown ashamed of their immigrant parents. Parents who worked menial jobs while their children climbed corporate ladders. Families divided by the gap between poverty and prosperity. After the service, a young man approached Brandon. "Mr. Chen, I needed to hear your testimony. I've been treating my mother the same way you did, keeping her away from my life because I'm embarrassed. But hearing your story, I'm going to change. I'm going to honor her before it's too late." Brandon hugged the stranger. "Do it now. Don't wait. You don't know how much time you have." This became a pattern. Brandon began speaking at churches and community organizations, sharing his testimony. Each time, people would approach him afterward saying his story had convicted them to honor their own parents. 1 year after Jesus appeared, Brandon stood at a podium at a conference on immigrant experiences in America. He'd been invited to speak about his journey from poverty to success, but with honesty about the costs and the transformation. "My name is Brandon Chen," he began. "I'm the son of Mei Chen, an immigrant from China who worked in garment factories and cleaned office buildings so I could attend private school. For many years, I was ashamed of that. I created a false identity where my mother was dead and I came from wealth. I hurt the person who loved me most to maintain an image that was a lie." He shared the full story, the accumulating cruelty, the night at the restaurant, Jesus' appearance, the visions that destroyed his false self. "Redemption is costly," Brandon said. "I lost my fiancée, my promotion, many friendships, but I gained my soul. I gained a genuine relationship with my mother. I gained integrity and truth." He paused, looking out at the audience of several hundred people. "And here's what I want everyone to know. The world will tell you that success means leaving your humble origins behind, that you should be embarrassed by parents who don't fit into elite spaces. That image matters more than honor, but those are lies. The truth is that honoring your parents, especially parents who sacrificed for you, is more important than any worldly success." After his talk, a reporter asked, "Do you regret your choices? If you could go back, would you still pursue success?" Brandon thought carefully. "I don't regret pursuing education or working hard, but I regret letting success poison my character. I regret choosing image over integrity. If I could go back, I'd pursue success while honoring my mother from the beginning. Those things don't have to be opposed." "Do you still work at the same firm?" another reporter asked. "Yes, I'm still a vice president. I probably won't make partner now. My honesty about my deception cost me that opportunity. But I'm grateful I still have my job. And more importantly, I have my mother. I have truth. I have peace." 3 years after Jesus appeared, Brandon sat with his mother in a hospice room. Mei was 71 years old and dying of cancer. The diagnosis had come 6 months earlier, stage 4 lung cancer, likely from decades of breathing chemicals in poorly ventilated garment factories. The doctors said she had weeks, maybe days, but Mei was at peace. She held Brandon's hand and smiled. "I am ready," she said in Mandarin. "I am not afraid. I'm not ready," Brandon admitted, tears streaming down his face. "I only got 3 years with you, really with you, after wasting 5 years. It's not enough time. 3 years of truth better than 5 years of lies," Mei said. "I am happy, Brandon. I die knowing my son loves me, honors me. I die with prayers answered." She squeezed his hand weakly. "You know what I pray for 5 years? I pray Jesus save you, and he does. He appears to you. He changes your heart. My prayer is answered, so I die happy." "You saved me, Mom," Brandon said. "Your prayers built the bridge Jesus crossed to reach me. And now I tell you something," Mei said. "You must use your story to help others. So many children ashamed of immigrant parents. So many parents hurt like I was hurt. You tell them your story. You show them truth. You help them change before it is too late." "I will," Brandon promised. "I'll spend the rest of my life telling your story, honoring you, making sure people know what you sacrificed." Mei smiled. "Then my life has meaning. Then all the suffering, all the work, all the sacrifice, it has purpose." She closed her eyes, exhausted. Brandon sat beside her, holding her hand, treasuring these final moments. 3 days later, Mei Chen passed away peacefully with her son beside her. At her funeral, over 300 people attended, church members, former co-workers, and dozens of young people whose lives had been changed by hearing Brandon's testimony, people who'd learned to honor their parents because of his story. Brandon gave the eulogy, speaking in both Mandarin and English. "My mother, Mei Chen, was not famous. She was not wealthy. She was not educated by American standards. But she was a woman of extraordinary love, faith, and sacrifice." He shared her story, the poverty in China, the immigration, the brutal work, the sacrifices for him. "For 5 years, I was ashamed of my mother. I denied her, rejected her, hurt her in ways that should have destroyed our relationship. But she never stopped loving me, never stopped praying for me. And her prayers led to Jesus appearing to me and saving my soul." Brandon looked at his mother's casket. "Mom, thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for praying for me, even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Love that sacrifices, love that perseveres, love that forgives. I'll honor you for the rest of my life. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. 5 years after that transformative night, Brandon Chen sat in a television studio in New York, being interviewed for a documentary about immigrant experiences. He was 37 years old now, still working at the same investment firm, though he'd never made partner. He'd chosen a different path, using his platform and resources to serve immigrant communities rather than pursuing maximum corporate success. Tell us about the foundation you started, the interviewer asked. The Mei Chen Foundation, Brandon said, named after my mother. We provide scholarships for children of immigrant workers, kids whose parents work in factories, restaurants, cleaning services. We cover full tuition for private school and college. And we have one requirement. Students must honor and publicly acknowledge their parents, regardless of their parents' education or economic status. Why that requirement? The interviewer asked. Because I don't want any student to make the mistakes I made, Brandon said. I don't want them to achieve success by denying the people who sacrificed for them. I want them to understand that honoring your parents is more important than impressing wealthy people. The foundation has provided over 200 scholarships in 5 years, the interviewer noted. That's significant. My mother worked herself to death so I could have opportunities, Brandon said. I'm using those opportunities to help other children of workers. It's what she would have wanted. Let's talk about the night that changed your life, the interviewer said. You claim Jesus Christ appeared to you. Are you comfortable discussing that? It's the most important thing that ever happened to me, Brandon said. So yes, I'm comfortable discussing it. Jesus appeared in my apartment 5 years ago, after I'd humiliated my mother publicly. He showed me visions of the pain I'd caused her, made me experience her suffering from her perspective, and he gave me a choice. Continue destroying my soul for worldly success, or choose truth and honor. Some viewers might be skeptical of a supernatural claim, the interviewer said. I understand that, Brandon said. I would have been skeptical too, 5 years ago, but I know what I experienced, and more importantly, I know it transformed me. The old Brandon, ashamed, deceptive, cruel, he's dead. This Brandon is different, not because I decided to change, but because Jesus changed me. What would you say to young professionals who feel pressure to hide their humble origins? The interviewer asked. Brandon looked directly into the camera. I'd say this. Whatever success you achieve by denying your parents is built on sand. It will collapse eventually. But success built on honoring those who sacrificed for you that has a solid foundation. He paused. I lost a lot 5 years ago when I chose truth. Lost my fiancée, lost my partnership track, lost my carefully constructed image. But I gained something invaluable. My integrity, my relationship with my mother before she died, and my soul. And that trade was worth it. The interview ended, and as Brandon left the studio, his phone buzzed. A text from a young woman he'd mentored. Mr. Chen, I followed your advice. I introduced my mother to my colleagues today. I told them about how she works as a housekeeper and how proud I am of her. Thank you for teaching me that honor matters more than image. Brandon smiled. This was his mission now. This was how he honored his mother's memory by helping others avoid his mistakes. That evening, Brandon visited his mother's grave in a cemetery in northeast Philadelphia. He brought flowers and sat on the bench nearby. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. 5 years since Jesus appeared, 5 years since you died, and I miss you every single day. He looked at her headstone, which read, The foundation is going well, Brandon continued. We're helping more families every year. Your story is touching thousands of people, and Mom, kids are learning to honor their parents because of what happened to us. He felt the familiar ache of grief he'd never stop missing her, but also gratitude, because he'd had 3 years of genuine relationship with his mother before she died. 3 years of honoring her, loving her, treasuring her. It wasn't enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was infinitely more than the 0 time he would have had if Jesus hadn't intervened. Thank you for praying for me, Brandon said. Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. I'm trying to pass that on, Mom, to teach others what you taught me, that love sacrifices, love perseveres, love never fails. As he sat there in the quiet cemetery, Brandon felt a warmth, not physical but spiritual, the presence of something beyond himself. He couldn't see Jesus this time, but he felt him, and he heard, not audibly but in his spirit, the words, "Well done, good and faithful son. You're honoring your mother. You're helping others. You're using your story for my kingdom. Keep going, Brandon. There are many more who need to hear this message." Brandon wiped his tears and smiled. "I will, Lord. For the rest of my life, I will." He stood and walked back to his car. He had a speaking engagement tomorrow at a high school. More children of immigrants who needed to hear that success and honor weren't opposed, that you could achieve without betraying those who raised you. The old Brandon had pursued success at any cost, including the cost of his soul. The new Brandon pursued something better: truth, integrity, honor. And the difference between those two versions of himself was a supernatural encounter with Jesus Christ, orchestrated by a mother who never stopped praying, even when her son had stopped deserving it. There's a particular sin that's rarely preached about but devastatingly common: the sin of shame. Not being ashamed of our own wrongdoing, that's healthy conviction, but being ashamed of the people who love us because they don't fit our image. Brandon Chen's story is extreme, but the pattern is tragically familiar. Children who achieve success and then distance themselves from parents who are too poor, too immigrant, too uneducated, too different from the world they're trying to enter. Young professionals who hide their working-class roots. College students who lie about what their parents do for a living. Adults who avoid bringing parents around successful colleagues or wealthy friends. And each act of denial, each moment of shame, each choice of image over honor, it wounds the people who sacrificed for our success. It breaks the hearts of those who loved us unconditionally. But this story isn't just about shame. It's about redemption through supernatural confrontation. Jesus didn't gently suggest to Brandon that he should honor his mother. He forced Brandon to experience every wound he'd inflicted, to feel the pain from his mother's perspective. Sometimes, love looks like devastating conviction. Sometimes, grace requires destruction of our false selves before reconstruction can begin. If you're watching this and you've been ashamed of your parents or anyone who helped you but doesn't fit your image, hear this: you're destroying something precious. Your parents' love is a gift you don't deserve and can never repay. Rejecting them to maintain your image is a sin with eternal consequences. The Bible is clear. Honor your father and mother isn't a suggestion, it's a commandment. And Jesus takes it seriously enough that he appears to people who violate it, as he appeared to Brandon. But this story also shows us hope. Brandon's transformation wasn't gradual or comfortable. It was sudden, painful, costly. He lost his fiancée, his promotion, his social standing. But he gained his soul. And he got 3 years with his mother before she died, 3 years of genuine relationship that wouldn't have existed if Jesus hadn't intervened. Some of you watching this don't have 3 years. Your parents are elderly, sick, or nearing the end of their lives. You're running out of time to choose honor over shame. Don't wait for Jesus to appear in your apartment. Choose now. Call them, visit them, thank them, acknowledge publicly what they sacrificed for you. And if your parent has already died and you never made things right, there's still redemption. You can't apologize to them, but you can honor their memory. You can tell others their story. You can help other families avoid your mistakes. That's what Brandon does now. He uses his failure to save others from similar shame. The foundation Brandon started has helped 200 families in 5 years. His testimony has changed thousands of lives. His mother's prayers didn't just save Brandon, they created ripple effects that continue spreading. That's what happens when we surrender to Jesus's correction, when we accept the painful truth about ourselves, when we choose honor over image. God redeems everything, even our worst failures, and uses them for his kingdom. If Jesus appeared to you tonight, what would he show you? Whose pain have you been ignoring? Who have you been ashamed of when you should be grateful? What lies have you been maintaining to preserve an image? You don't need to wait for a supernatural encounter. You can choose truth right now. You can honor your parents today. You can acknowledge the people who sacrificed for you this week. It might cost you. It cost Brandon his engagement, his promotion, his social standing. But what he gained was infinitely more valuable: integrity, peace, genuine relationship, and a soul he didn't have to be ashamed of. The world tells you success means leaving your humble origins behind. Jesus tells you honor is more important than image. Choose wisely.
Subscribe to Tales of God's Grace for more true miracles and stories of redemption. Your support helps us reach and restore families around the world. Don't forget to tag a friend and share this video, so together we can spread faith, love, and healing where it's needed most.